Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today we're going to share Dogman encounter horror stories. First story, the Michigan Dogman. I've always been fascinated by urban legends and tales of supernatural creatures. I've heard of the Dogman since I was young when I first heard the legend played on the radio. A mysterious creature said to roam the forests of the Great Lakes region. And with my fascination came a sense of wanting to find the creature and to see for myself if it was really out there. Armed with a curious mind and a flashlight, I set out to explore the woods near my hometown. It was an overcast night, with only the dim glow of the stars to guide my path. As I ventured deeper into the forest, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was being watched. Every rustle of leaves and snap of a twig sent shivers down my spine. But I pressed on, my curiosity overpowering my unease. Little did I know how much of a mistake it was to ignore my instincts. After what felt like hours of wandering, I stumbled forward. An eerie silence blanketed the forest as if a switch was flipped and all the sound in the world disappeared. Something drew me toward it, an invisible force urging me to step closer. That's when I surveyed my surroundings in detail and saw it. A pair of glowing amber eyes staring back at me from the shadows. My heart skipped a beat as the creature revealed itself, a massive canine-like figure, standing upright on two legs. Its fur was matted and dark, and its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. It was a Dogman, and it had fixed its gaze upon me. A primal fear surged through my veins, and I stumbled back, dropping my flashlight in the process. And with but a moment's hesitation, I turned and ran as fast as my legs could carry me. The sound of heavy footsteps pounded behind me, growing louder and closer with each passing second. I could hear its snarls and the sharp snapping of its jaws, hungry for the chase. My breath grew ragged, and my muscles screamed in protest, but the adrenaline fueled my desperate sprint. Branches whipped against my face, and the forest floor seemed to rise up to trip me. But I pushed through, determined to escape the clutches of the monstrous Dogman. My lungs burned, and my vision blurred as I reached the edge of the woods. My house stood just a few yards away, its lights providing a beacon of hope. Summoning the last reserves of my strength, I sprinted across the yard and flung open the front door. I slammed it shut, panting heavily as I leaned against it, my heart racing in my chest. I felt a mixture of relief and terror as I looked through the window and saw the Dogman standing at the edge of the clearing, its gaze fixed upon me. Its mouth curled into a wicked snarl, revealing sharp, glistening teeth in what looked like a cruel and deranged smile. For a moment, we locked eyes, a battle of wills between human and beast. I knew that I had escaped, but the encounter had left an indelible mark on my soul. The Dogman had shown me the darkness lurking just beyond the realm of our understanding. It was a sight I would never forget. To this day, I'm plagued by the memory of that night. The image of the Dogman's glowing eyes and sinister grin haunts my dreams, a constant reminder of the terrors that exist in the shadows. I warn anyone who dares to venture into the Michigan wilderness, beware the Dogman's domain. It may be an urban legend to some, but for those who have encountered its malevolence, it is all too real. The forest hides its secrets well, and the Dogman waits patiently for its next victim. Ever since then, I haven't been able to look at the woods without a shudder going down my spine, hoping to not see the amber eyes staring back at me. If I were to give you all any advice, it would be, do not go out at night. Second story. My dog is scaring me. My ex didn't really like dogs, so after we broke up, the first thing I did was get a dog and all the other things he didn't approve of. Jake was a black lab mixed with a white patch on his chest, probably 50 or so pounds. I found him at a local adoption event. You donate whatever you can, and they choose a pet for you, and if you like the pet, you can accept the adoption match. The event was focused on animals that were on a kill list, and multiple shelters in the area were participating. So I went to the adoption event, and a woman named Angela introduced herself to me. She said she had been fostering Jake, and he was within the age range and size I was looking for. He's 2 years old. He'd been returned to the shelter because the family moved out of state and left him alone. She tells me that it was through no fault of his own because he was an amazing dog. Angela mentioned that he was a single pet kind of pet. She asked me if I wanted to take him on a walk, and she handed me his leash, and I hooked him up. I put his leash on him, and he just stared at me. I pulled the leash just slightly and asked him if he wanted to go for a walk, and he got up and walked to the door, kind of ignoring me, but being pretty obedient. Angela looked at me from the window while I walked him. I didn't really feel a connection to him. He was aloof and never looked at me unless I wasn't looking at him. I told her that I liked him, but would keep looking. I handed her back Jake, and she genuinely looked upset. I kept walking around the event and even volunteered to help put some of the dogs away into the vans to go home, hopefully to live another day. It was getting late and already dark when I made my way back to my car. And there was Angela with Jake. She was having a cigarette leaning against the car, talking to someone. It sounded like arguing. As I approached, she looked up at me. "Please take him. I can't keep him. He needs a good home." She pleaded with me, clearly desperate. I didn't know why, but I said yes, and before I knew it, she was handing me the leash and walking quickly away towards the street. The first few nights were fine. He slept under the bed, and I didn't really see him much. He seemed like he needed some time to readjust to being a pet. I didn't know how to connect with him. I'd throw him a toy, and he wouldn't come. I'd pour food out for him, and he wouldn't come out for it. But in the morning, it would be gone. I'm a pretty sound sleeper, but the sound of clawing under the bed a few days later woke me up out of a dead sleep. I jolted out of bed afraid. I was sweating and my heart was racing. I remembered I have Jake, and I call for him. He doesn't come out. No surprise, I call for him again, and I hear him clawing the floor and pulling himself out slowly from under the bed. His eyes wide and human-like. I patted the bed beside me, and he looks at the bed for a second bit and sinks back down and crawls back under the bed, ignoring me further. I only saw him for a second, and the room was pretty dark, but he looked different, somehow larger and more menacing. I must have been seeing things, I thought. I had a hard time falling asleep. I wake up around 5 in the morning a few days later and go to my office across the hall and start to work. The way the desk is set up, if the door is opened all the way and the bedroom door is also open, you can see under the bed a little bit. As the sun starts to come up, I notice a dark object on the floor. I can't tell what it is. Maybe the blanket fell off the bed, but as the sun rises, the shape becomes a more familiar shape. It's Jake with his dark eyes fixed on me from under the bed. He grins at me, his teeth look sharp, and he's drooling. I closed and locked the office door, not knowing what to do or what the hell that is under the bed. He looks so normal most of the time. I call the shelter that hosted the event and tell them about Angela, who said she was from shelter out west, but the woman on the phone wasn't really listening, and she had never heard of anyone named Angela from any shelters out west. She asked me to leave my name and number, and she'd check the list again to make sure. I kicked myself for installing the doggy door. It was so odd to hear the flapping of the door randomly as Jake came, and only when I wasn't around. I'm going to let him out, call animal control, and tell them that I found this random dog. He's not chipped. I didn't sign anything. Angela kind of just gave him to me. I was racked with guilt, so upset about how much I wanted a dog, and now I'm thinking of doing this. But he wasn't just a dog. I unlocked the door, and I can hear Jake in the bedroom. The door is somehow closed. I sit in my office all night, waiting for Jake to try to get in. He wouldn't go outside after that. It's like he knew of my plan and didn't want to give me an opportunity to call animal control. There were moments where he was a dog, and other times he was something else, this dog-like creature. Moving in a way animals just don't. I snuck out of the house once I heard the door flap and drove as fast as I could to a hotel where I cried and screamed on the way. I was finally free, out from under the watchful eye of my goddamn shelter devil dog. I got a 15th floor room with a balcony and a view of the ocean. As soon as I got into the room, I checked under the bed, the closet, the bathroom, everywhere for Jake. For the first time in almost 2 months, I slept soundly. I woke up, and that feeling of dread and fear that had been bubbling like a bad dinner in my gut was gone. I stayed there for 3 days until my credit card bled. I went back home, and the first thing I noticed was my front door was wide open. I wasn't sure if I should go in, but I did, and the thickness in the air is gone. The house seemed brighter and felt better. I look around everywhere in the house, and when I was convinced he's truly gone, I sat on my couch and cried in relief. My first thought after that was that doggy door, and I ran to the garage, and I grabbed some wood 2x4S, and I screw 5-inch screws into the door frame, and call a handyman and schedule someone to come over and replace the door. It had been almost 3 months since Jake left, and I've stopped seeing him sitting in the corner of the room at night, and I stopped hearing that clawing, dragging sounds under the bed when it's late and I'm almost asleep. That is until last week I looked out my bedroom window because I heard an obnoxious, repetitive knocking sound outside that was driving me crazy. I figured it was a woodpecker. We had so many of them in the woods behind my house, and if they land nearby, I can hear them from any of the rooms on that side of the house. The sun had gone down, and it was almost dark outside. Out of the corner of my eye, I see something moving in the trees and a flash of red with black around it. I focus my eyes, and Jake grins at me, showing big white teeth. He looks straight at me, with the same no-expression about 15 feet up in the trees behind my house. I close the blinds, grab my gun from the safe, and put it out on my nightstand. I keep hearing the knocking, and I lock the door and pull the covers around me. I don't know how I'm ever going to sleep again. I'm writing this from my mom's house. She only lives 20 or so minutes away from me, and I've been hearing sounds at night here too. Third story. Weird creature in South Carolina mountains. Been a fan of this sub for a while. Figured I should go ahead and share my own story. This took place last year at the beginning of summer. I was with my mom, headed down to my Nana's farm to visit for a weekend. For some context, she lives on a farm way back in the country, right at the foot of a mountain in rural SC. It's a very rural, secluded area, so the roads are badly maintained and barely wide enough for 2 cars to pass one another. The houses are also spread out and set far back into the tree line from the road, so there's very little ambient light besides the headlights of a car. So my mom and I are driving along, her in the driver's seat and me in passenger. It was around 11 p.m., and we're 15 minutes out from Nana's, deep in the woods with the radio down almost to silent. We come onto this straight stretch of the road in a heavily wooded area, and suddenly this blur of a creature darts out across the road, right at the edge of our headlights. It was moving pretty good, but both me and my mom were able to get a good look at it and both agree on what we saw. It was a fairly large creature, roughly the size of a person/bigger. Neither of us could make out the head, but we both remember it appearing to have a segmented body, my mom's words, as if it were emaciated and its rib cage was poking out. The reflection of light made it hard for me to tell color, but my mom said she remembered it to be dark and she didn't see fur/hair. It had long limbs, and as it moved across the road, it didn't run the way a dog or horse would with all 4 legs. The best word to describe it would be loping, using its front limbs to pull itself along, and it was moving considerably fast. We both said something along the lines of, "What the hell is that?" as it crossed in front of us. As we got up to where it had crossed, I turned to look at it just as it reached the other side of the road and out of our headlights. And I swear on my life, it stood up and ran. Not like a dog rearing on its hind legs. It was definitely bipedal. I immediately yelled that it had stood up, and we both started getting nervous. I honestly would have thought I was going insane had I not had another person in the car with me. My mom has always been a pretty level-headed person and not superstitious, but she was very nervous and made me agree to not tell my Nana about it to avoid scaring her, which made me recognize how serious this was. I should also mention that there had apparently been a series of attacks on livestock/horses in the area around the time this happened. People were saying they found wire fences ripped through and their animals attacked. I don't think any died, but if I remember correctly, there were a few horses that were severely wounded. There have been a few other strange instances in the area, but that was my personal experience. Fourth story, the Dogman. Allow me to preface the story with this. It breaks my heart to see all the stories on Nosleep where the OP proudly states, "This is my first/second/last piece of fiction. How am I doing?" No, You'll be getting none of this from me. This is in part because I feel I'd be doing my own experience a disservice by embellishing it more than I need to in order to make up for lapses in my memory, and in part because I'm truly afraid to fictionalize anything about him because what if it means he'll come back? To that end, this story is not necessarily linear. I likely should have done it in multiple parts for the sake of length, but I wouldn't even know where to place the breaks. It has a clear beginning, but no clear end, and no moral. I never figure out what he wanted from me. Maybe he didn't either. And maybe, though I hope I'm wrong on this, maybe this story isn't over yet. It started during my junior year of high school. I was what else? Dicking around on Encyclopedia Dramatica, reading the creepypasta page. Whatever happened to that thing? Coincidentally, what happened next is the reason that I now settle for reading no sleep. Though the quality of the stories is far less impressive to me overall, I cannot stand anything with pictures. Not anymore. I can't even tell you what the picture really looked like anymore, or what story it corresponded to. It was in various shades of gray, with a strange figure in it, as are many of the pictures on that old page. All I know is that I looked at it for a minute, and it's like it turned into something else. I guess the best way to explain it is like one of those books where you stare through the page and it morphs into something 3D. Suddenly, what was there took on a new shape and appearance, just long enough for me to get the feel of it. I must have set a world record for how quickly I exited Firefox, and for a long time after, I sat with my head on my knees and alternately tried to remember exactly what I'd seen and picture anything else. It was later that night that I first saw him. It was not so much saw as was forced to see. The image was in my mind for a split second. Much like I since learned, flashbacks play unbidden for a PTSD sufferer. I was just sitting there in a shower, working a knot out of my hair and gazing absently at the tile wall. And there he was. His skin was the soft, weathered gray of an ancient barn wall and entirely hairless. It wasn't so much skin as a flat, smooth color that coated his humanoid frame. I say humanoid because it was hard to use any other description. He was bipedal, but his posture was slightly hunched, certain joints curving in the decidedly wrong direction, and long limbs. My focus was, and would always be, however, on his face. It had a decidedly canine quality, but without much of a nose or muzzle. In fact, his nose and mouth area were mostly in shadow, leaving only the faint impression of thin, crowded teeth below bony nostrils and sallow cheeks. His eyes were enormous and wide-set. They seemed impossibly far back in his skull, dark around the rims, but lighter and lighter until the dilated black pupil. Small, triangular ears added to the dog-like appearance. In one hand, he held what looked like some sort of string instrument, perhaps a variety of violin. He was grinning at me. I don't remember much of the rest of the night, except that I texted my boyfriend until I literally couldn't stay awake any longer. From that night on, for the next 3 years, I slept with the lamp on. But that never helped. He came back anyway. It became such that I could tell when I was going to see him. At some point during the day, a claustrophobic, panic feeling would come over me, and I would know. He never showed up until evening. Then there he would be. It was always a fleeting glance somewhere, at least at first. I'd look somewhere, and that grinning, vacant canine face would be staring back for just long enough that I could register it. Sometimes I would have the brightness on my computer set too low, and for a moment my own reflection would be replaced with his. Sometimes he was a shimmer across a closed window. Once, I awoke to see his silhouette hunched in front of my bedroom mirror, waiting patiently for me to notice. It was always as though he was staring out a photograph at me. His presence eclipsed everything around him to where it was impossible to see anything but his dilated pupils and the smooth tops of his cheekbones. Staring. This continued for the entire school year. I figure I must be going crazy. I had scared myself over some creepypasta, and my lack of sleep was making me hallucinate. Other than an anxiety disorder, I was generally mentally healthy. Something must have been pushing me over the edge. So I thought, until other people started to see him. My boyfriend had grown up in Ronan, Montana, on a reservation that was famous for its paranormal events. He was a tall, amber-eyed half-Indian with a strong jaw and a history of going ghost hunting with his buddies up in the hills. Because of all this, I had entrusted him with some degree of what was going on, that I was seeing something that wouldn't go away. His advice was to ignore it. He called me, sobbing, his voice panicked. The clock read 3:42 a.m. Once he calmed down a little, I got the full story. He had been reading in his bedroom. It was in the basement of his mother's tiny house, with the windows just above ground level, when he heard a noise outside. A stringed instrument, almost like a violin, playing a song he thought he recognized. Being a violinist himself, he was intrigued. Had one of his neighbors picked up the instrument, too? He had pulled back the curtain to see a hunched, canine figure leering in at him, its ghoulish face inches from his own. The next day, he papered over the basement windows. The trend continued, unstoppable, myself never able to get used to the airless, terrifying feeling before he would appear and the shock of his inhuman face looking right through me. Once my best friend and I saw him at the same time, his shadow appearing against the off-white wall of her bedroom. Another time, I was at a camp in Traverse City, Michigan, when one of my cabin mates woke me up, shrieking that a dog-like face with enormous eyes had been looking in at her through one of the windows. Yet another time, two of my friends and I were in my living room late at night, when one of them, Tyler, stopped immediately and stared in horror into the guest bedroom behind me. When I asked him what was wrong, he said he'd seen this thing like a gray person, but his limbs were all wrong and looking at a picture on the wall. When we walked into the room and flipped the light switch, I saw the framed drawing Tyler had indicated, a charcoal sketch of a man playing a violin. My friend Harry was alone in his room one night, after he and I had spent several hours discussing the phenomenon, and he heard movement from his lawn and noises that sounded, he said, almost like soft howling and the padding of something on 2 feet. Each time, he seemed to show sooner, stay longer, become more vivid. It was as though he was testing the waters. The last time I saw him was 3 years ago. At my boyfriend's request, I had learned to do energy meditations and agreed to carry around charms he made for me. A handmade leather dream catcher, still fresh with the smoky smell of my boyfriend's house on the reservation, was hung above my bed. His small protections seemed to have kept him safe. I, however, couldn't escape. No matter where I went or what I did, it felt as though the Dogman was watching. I had spent all day feverishly afraid. That familiar, oppressive sense that I would see him soon was upon me. It had gotten to the point by now where I could sometimes tell days in advance. I'd spend hours or days in a state of numb panic, shying away from noises and anything even vaguely reflective. This particular time, I worried that it may have been triggered by the fact that I had been trying to draw his violin earlier that day. I had by now accepted that he was real, in some sense, and feared that the drawing would attract him somehow. I left it on my desk downstairs and went to my room, regretting having ever started it. The sense was still nauseatingly strong as I readied myself for bed as usual. I closed my bedroom door and sealed it, as I had begun to superstitiously make a habit of doing, placing a carved stone box against the door with a chunk of minerals from the Black Hills balanced against that. In part, this was a way for me to know if my Snoopy parents had come into my room in the middle of the night. There was no way to replace the seal from the outside or prevent from moving it when entering. I awoke feeling wonderful, relieved. The sun was streaming in under my curtains, a magpie squawked happily outside, and all seemed at peace. It was miraculous. It was the first time I had felt the feeling and not seen him. I rolled over and saw my drawing of his violin placed next to me on my pillow, the one that I had left on my desk. My seal was undisturbed. I don't know what he wanted from me that night. Perhaps just to remind me that he was still there, still watching. I think of how it must have been him, tall, hunched, grinning, standing over me while I slept, painstakingly setting the smudged watercolor paper next to me, and my heart still skips a beat years later. But more than that, one question makes my blood run cold. I haven't seen him in so long. What was he waiting for? Fifth story. The Coyote Man. Ever since the age of 13, I've seen, heard, and felt things that are unexplainable more times than I can count. I have a family history of mental illnesses that could be the reason as to why I had those experiences, so when stuff like that happened, even though I was terrified, I would brush them off as hallucinations. I am on medicine now that is really helping me, and when I do have hallucinations, they are few and far between. However, this time in particular has me totally confused and thoroughly creeper out. I was 17 at the time. My family and I had just gotten back for vacation really late, and we had all agreed that a shower before going to bed would be really nice. My family is really big. There are 12 in my family, and 8 of us were living in the house. I said I would take the last shower because I wanted to sit outside and get some time alone. The only light source was one of those street lamps to light our driveway. Our house was in the middle of absolute nowhere. It had been about 15 minutes, and as time passed, an uneasy feeling started to creep into my stomach. I felt like it would probably be a good idea to go inside, but when I heard coyotes yipping and howling somewhere out in the field, I decided to stay outside for a little bit longer and listen to them. That's when pure fear consumed everything in my body. Not even controlling my own body, I slowly looked over to the road. And that's when I saw a 10-foot-tall figure with elongated arms and legs and giant red eyes gliding down the road, about as fast as a slow-moving car. This thing was really, really thin, was standing completely straight up, and was hovering 1 to 2 feet about the road. I watched in horror as the thing passed by our house without a sound. The whole time I couldn't move. A couple of minutes later, I finally regained control of my body and ran inside. I didn't tell anyone about it other than my doctor, because I thought it was just another hallucination. A year later, I moved in with my sister and brother-in-law. Well, my brother-in-law and I were on a bike ride at about 11:30 at night, talking about creepy experiences we've had. I started telling him about the Coyote Man, as that was the name I had given him. As I was explaining the features of the thing, his face grew more and more confused as I continued to talk. And just as I was going to talk about the big red eyes that the thing had, his face lit up. I asked him why he was making the face he was, and then he lifted his hands up to his eyes, making large circles with both of them. I started getting creeped out, and that's when he was like, big red eyes. And I immediately started getting the chills. He started to explain that when he was 19, he saw the exact same thing, and right before he saw it, he heard coyotes yipping and howling as well. I was freaking out at this point because I had never told anyone about it other than my doctor, and I thought I was just seeing things. He continued to tell me that the thing actually chased him, and he said that he was absolutely terrified and that it was the fastest he had run his whole life. He said the only way to lose the thing was to climb to the top of a silo. He said he was up there for the rest of the night, just waiting for the thing to show up again, but it never did. I got the chills for minutes on end when he told me that. I have no idea what that thing was, as I've never heard of anything like it since. Every time I think of that experience, I get super creeper out. 6th story, Demon Dog. This wasn't something that I personally experienced, but it was something that happened to a close friend a few years ago, and it always made me wonder. He and his cousin were walking down a street at night when they saw a figure in the distance on all fours. They didn't think much of the figure, so they continued walking towards it. When they got closer, they realized it was a dog. The dog wore a white mask that seemed to be molded specifically for its face. Blood dripped from its face and out of its mouth, and its eyes were pinned on them. Then its head twisted until it was completely upside down. Of course, they bolted. Sometime in the future, I'm not sure if it was later that night or a few days after, my friend was showering. He got out of the shower and was about to walk upstairs when he saw the dog again. This time, it was on the stairs, blocking the passageway. Again, the dog didn't move. Its eyes simply followed my friend's movement. He screamed and ran into his mom's room to tell her what happened. She told him that she didn't hear him screaming, and when they exited the room, the dog was no longer there. Years have passed since then, and he hasn't had another encounter since. What is this dog? Why didn't it attack? Why did it appear twice? Is there some sort of meaning to it? I initially thought it may have been in his head, but I talked to his cousin. They both saw the dog, and they were both freaked out by it. Seventh story. My life was saved by a Dogman hunter. I was heading back into town with my buddy Joe, after spending the weekend out on a frozen lake, ice fishing, and drinking beer. The fish were really biting, too. Joe's SUV was stuffed to the gills with walleye and smallmouth bass. The northerly town of Kapuskasing was buried under a mountain of snow, the worst snowfall since the winter of '97. I've lived my entire life in northern Ontario, so I've seen my fair share of snow, but nothing like this. But you learn to expect the unexpected in northern Ontario. We were heading over a steep incline, enjoying a generous backdrop of pine trees painted in freshly fallen snow, when tragedy struck. We watched as two police helicopters landed on the small slice of highway, causing the trickles of traffic to grind to a halt. Not a good sign. This highway was the only road home. We later learned that a newlywed couple had collided with a transport truck, killing both the husband and wife. We were forced to turn around and head back over the hill, where we found ourselves driving through a modest-sized hamlet consisting of one stop sign, a gas station/motel/restaurant, plus a smattering of wartime houses. Except, all you could see was the pointed rooftops. The houses were completely submerged in snow. It was an incredible sight, something you only see this far up north. And even then, this was rare. Joe didn't want to stick around, waiting a good 12 hours for the road to clear. He had a wife and kids to get home to, so we pulled over, wondering what our next move should be. Joe had that look in his eye, the look he gets when he's about to do something dangerous or stupid, or both. I know this look well. Hand tight, he said, and hold on. We turned onto a crude version of a road, the kind designated for snowmobiles, with stop signs standing a mere 3 feet tall. The road was extremely narrow. Snowbanks as high as trees were towering over us like large, looming walls of white. If anything were to approach, we'd have nowhere to go. There wasn't enough room to turn around. I was becoming increasingly uneasy. This is how people get hurt. Or worse. Are you sure this is safe? I asked, hating the sound of my voice. Joe ignored me, or simply didn't hear me. He was busy white-knuckling the minivan through the snow-tunneled trail, the glare of the setting sun blinding us the entire time. We drove for 15 minutes, knifing our way along the icy road, which was bumpier than a wooden roller coaster. It was obvious that we shouldn't be here. The impending darkness didn't improve my mood one bit, either. I had a bad feeling about this. Joe stopped the van. "What's up?" I asked, not trusting the look on his face. Joe didn't answer. I could see his mind at work, assessing the direness of our situation. "I've got to turn this thing around somehow," he finally said. I couldn't see how this was possible, as we were sandwiched between two colossal snowbanks. Something flickered inside Joe's dark eyes. "What's that up ahead?" he asked, flashing on the high beams. "I think it's a road." It was. We edged a bit further, stopping at this makeshift road. There were no signs or road markings to be seen. Nothing. In fact, this road looked worse than the one we were on. "Let's see where it goes," Joe said, cranking the wheel. As the minivan lumbered down the unmarked road, an ominous feeling swept over me. It was impossible to ignore. We were in trouble. There was no denying it. We were completely off the grid. Not even Google Maps could save us. There was only one way to go, straight. The road was leading us into the dark of the forest. And when you're this far north, that's never a good idea. Especially at night. That's when the wolves come out. It was looking to be a moonless night, which didn't help us one bit. Joe's hands were quivering as he clenched the wheel, keeping us from skidding into the towering snowbank. He kept assuring me we'd be all right, but I've heard that one before. Joe slammed on the brakes. "You see that?" He pointed. "Over there." I squinted my eyes. "Look," he said. "Fire." Deep into the forest, I spotted a small, flickering flame, dancing blue and orange and yellow and wild. Probably a campfire. Just then, a strange and disturbing sound crackled through the night like a howling wolf. "You hear that?" he asked. The animal cried out again. It was the loneliest yowl I'd ever heard. "There it goes again," It sounded like a wolf, except it didn't sound like any wolf I'd heard before, and I've heard plenty. Whatever it was dangerously close. Wolf, I said nervously, but not believing it. As soon as those words left my mouth, a pair of glowing red eyes appeared out of nowhere. Joe stopped the car and killed the lights. "Be still," he said. I did just that. I sat motionless beside him in the car, but my hands were shaking. Those laser red eyes were approaching an impossible speed. "Reach back and grab the gun," Joe whispered. I tried, but it was out of reach. They were on his side, closer to the back. Those glowing eyes flashed on and off, and for a moment everything was still. Then from out of nowhere, the beast lunged onto the hood of the van. "AHHHH!" we screamed in unison. The thing was huge, unlike any animal I'd ever seen. It looked like an overgrown German shepherd, except it was standing on its hind legs like a human. It was snarling at us, making ungodly noises, thrashing about. The creature was long and gangly, frothing at the mouth, clearly rabid. "Dogman," Joe said, clearly astonished. "I don't believe it." Joe gunned it, looking to run the thing over and speed away, but the wheels were caught on ice. Without warning, the beast leapt off the hood and started scratching at my door, its claws like daggers, tearing the door from its hinges. It smashed through the windshield, shattering it into a million pieces. With its dog-like face twisted in rage, the thing took a swipe at me. Its long, toothy claws just inches from ripping my eyeballs from their sockets. The SUV shook, spilling the cooler of dead fish. The smell was atrocious. The Dogman disagreed. Before it could rip apart my throat with its curvy claws, the creature turned from me and trampled to the back of the van, where it devouring the fish in seconds flat. Its muzzle turned blood red. Watching it lick the fish guts from its paws was sickening. This isn't how I wanted to die. The Dogman's razor-sharp teeth were on full display. The insidious brute seemed hell-bent on killing us both. We were, in fact, the main course. It took a tentative step toward us, licking its filthy face. I gave Joe a look that said, "Nice knowing you, pal," when out of nowhere came an ear-ringing blast, striking the creature in the shoulder. The thing screamed in protest. Then came another shot, hitting the B-square in the chest. Blood and gore spilled like wine across the interior of the SUV. "Someone's shooting at it," Joe proclaimed. 3 more shots rang out. The creature snarled, wiped the fleshy cartilage from its bloodied face, then attacked. Bang! The shot went wide, but it was enough to send the beast scurrying back into the woods. "Holy hell," Joe said in a shaky voice. Without a second thought, he pulled his seat back as far as it could go, then shimmied his way into the back of the van and grabbed the gun. "We're going to need this." All of a sudden, it was freezing. With the vehicle off and the windshield busted in, it was an igloo inside the van. "It's getting cold in here," I said, shaking uncontrollably. A large plume of steam escaped from my face as I spoke. I was in shock. I had no idea what that thing was, but it damn near killed me. The scene inside of the minivan was that out of a horror movie. The smell was even worse. I tried opening the door, but it wouldn't budge. Joe tried his door with the same results. We were stuck. I'd sliced myself to shreds before I got halfway through my windshield. Joe's door had a bullet hole where the handle should be. We'd have to escape through the back. Blood and guts and fish bones and all. It was gruesome, but we did it. Once outside, I scanned the area, searching for that dog creature that almost killed me, but had vanished. Joe's shotgun was aimed at a speck of light approaching from straight ahead. A car. Within minutes, we were greeted by a Volkswagen microbus. It stopped directly in front of us. The driver got out and ran toward us carrying a sniper rifle, wearing a belt of ammunition. He spoke fast and with purpose, checking his surrounding while doing so. "You saw it? You did, didn't you? Excellent. Which way to go, by the way?" This guy made Clint Eastwood look like a Boy Scout. I honestly thought he was going to kill us. He frowned as he surveyed the scene. Then he shrugged. "I suppose you'll be needing my help." He ran to the bus and opened up the hatch, exposing an array of military-style weapons to the likes I'd only seen in the movies. "Holy hell," Joe said, clearly impressed. I remained quiet, unsure what to make of this heavily armed, red-headed stranger who literally just appeared out of nowhere to save our lives. But there seemed to be no other choice. Whoever he was, he drove us back to his cottage, regaling us with the history of this Dogman creature. He told us some pretty tall tales. His name was Patrick. Apparently, he's a Dogman hunter. He says he's never captured one, but claims to have seen 4 or 5, wounding 2 of them. Pesky bastards, he says. Hard to kill. He'd been hunting the one that attacked us for weeks. Apparently, it's been mutilating deer and coyotes, as well as regular cats and dogs all winter long, leaving their salvaged remains scattered along the sides of the road and in people's backyards. The locals were starting to panic. Joe and I texted home, then we stayed up all night talking about Dogman. I was having a hard time coming to grips with all this, seeing as how I almost died at the hands of one of them. Joe, on the other hand, was enthralled. The next day, we drove back to the SUV to inspect the damage. When we arrived, the van was completely dismantled and destroyed. It lay in ruins. Everything inside it had been ravaged and plundered. "This isn't right," Patrick said. "There must be an explanation." We scanned the surrounding area for over an hour and came up empty-handed. A fresh blanket of snow had fallen overnight, making track finding next to impossible. The disappointment on Patrick's face was palpable. Reluctantly, we hopped into his microbus and he drove us home with our tails between our legs, where we arrived a day late in short one SUV. We stayed in touch with Patrick going forward. Joe, coming from a long lineage of seasoned hunters, was intrigued by this Dogman creature. Naturally, I was skeptical. I'm fairly certain that beast meant to eat me. The last thing I wanted to do was volunteer to go searching for it. Yet, unbeknownst to me, this was the making of a team of hunters, Dogman hunters. Still, amidst all the excitement, a feeling of trepidation had stolen over me. There was lesson to be learned from all of this, a lesson lost on my gun-toting counterparts. Some roads are best untraveled, especially in northern Ontario, where anything can happen, and usually does. 8th story. I don't think my dog is really a dog. I'm currently hiding in my closet, shaking in fear. I'm typing this out on my phone, so I'm sorry if there's a formatting issue or grammar, but I don't really give a right now. In case I don't make an update to this post, please report this to the authorities or anyone, please. I don't know what to do. During April of 2018, I adopted a 5-month-old puppy from the pound. I was lucky enough to get her out of that hellhole and into my loving home. She was a border collie mix, and her name was Nellie. I don't know what the fuck happened to her, but what I have now is not my dog. She was a timid little pup when I first took her home. I remember she was inside for at least 5 minutes before she peed on the carpet. I could only laugh and kiss her because I was so happy. She slept in my bed that night, and for many more nights to come. She only weighed maybe 6 or 7 kilograms when I first picked her up. The months that followed were amazing. For the first time since I graduated high school, I was over the moon. Every day when I got home from work, she would rush to greet me with her lead dangling from her mouth, her tail wagging wildly. She absolutely loved to grab the newspaper from the mailbox with me. She was also an awesome chick magnet, but that's besides the point. She loved my neighbor, a nice man named Paul, whose wife had recently passed away from breast cancer. He was an older gentleman, well into his 50s, but never looked a day over 40. He liked to throw a barbecue for the few neighbors we had in our little rural community. He always made an effort, so we all returned the favor with bringing food and beer. Things began to change in December of 2018. In the early hours of the morning on the 5th, I believe, Nellie woke me up. I grabbed my glasses from the bedside table and flicked on the lamp. She was stood about a meter from the door, pointing right at it. I could hear a low growl emanating from her. Curious, I got out of bed and opened the door. To her surprise, there was nothing there. I thought that would have been the end of it. A few more days pass, and on the 9th, it happened again, early hours of the morning and pointing at the door. This continued for the next week. I believe this is when Nellie disappeared. At about 2 a.m. on the 21st, Nellie woke me up and wanted to go outside. She would do this once every few weeks, so it was nothing out of the ordinary. She would wake me up by licking my face and then sulk and lay down in front of the door if I wouldn't get up. Behind my backyard is a forest that extends for miles. Sometimes Nellie liked to hunt down rabbits and possums when we would go for a walk through the woods. When I let her out that night, she walked to about 5 meters before the tree line. I watched her pee, and she started her way back to the house. This is when things didn't go exactly as planned. She must have heard something because she whipped around and pointed at the trees and growled. I thought it might have been a rabbit, but thinking back on it now, it was probably something much worse. She barked, then made a beeline for the trees. She disappeared into the thickness before I heard more barking. Then nothing. Absolute silence. I was about to grab a torch and put on my red bands, but then the trees started rustling. There was no wind. It was distressing to say the least. Then they stopped. I called out her name and waited. About a minute later, she wandered out of the trees and back inside. I thought nothing of it and promptly went back to sleep. I should have thought about it. As the months continued, things got weird. She stopped wanting to go on walks. She cut back on her food and began to get skinnier. I decided to change up her diet from dog biscuits to meat. She liked that. She really liked that. Sometimes she would run off into the woods to go hunting for rabbits or anything she could get her paws on. I also noticed she began to get bigger. Not fat bigger, because as she got bigger, it looked like she got skinnier. Then she stopped playing with her toys. That weirded me out the most because her beloved squeaky duck toy I got for her the day she came home was always with her inside the house. Now it lay gathering dust in the corner of my room. But she began to show a liking to the barbecue get-together Paul would throw. A little too much. Honestly, that should have been a warning sign. That day was the 26th of February, 2019. In the following weeks, people unfortunately died. It was small to begin with. That makes it sound better than it was. Old people died first. As sad as it sounded, we all thought it was because of old age. Then we got the details. Horrific details. They were murders, violent and bloody murders. We were absolutely shit scared then. Paul and I started communicating a lot more than we used to, a text every hour or so just to check in, or maybe a phone call or two. He told me I should keep the key for my gun safe in the lock in case of an emergency. I listened. I listened because I trusted him. I listened because he was one of my only friends. This brings us to tonight, the 24th of March. I awoke to the sound of gunfire. I rushed over to my curtains and yanked them open. Paul's house was on fire. I immediately rushed to put on some thick clothes and grabbed a flashlight and my phone ready to dial 111 for a fire truck. At the time, I didn't even notice my bedroom door was open when I clearly remember closing before I went to bed that night. Nor did I notice Nellie was missing. I yanked open my back door and I froze. It was illuminated by the bright fire of Paul's home. It stood on its hind legs, tall and lanky, completely black with white highlights over its body. The eyes were almost a glowing red. Its claws were massive, and sadly one set was clearly protruding through Paul's chest. I actually don't know. It felt like so long ago, even though it was only an hour ago. I couldn't feel a thing. I couldn't even feel the flashlight slip through my fingers and land heavily on the concrete ground of my back patio. I instantly realized my mistake, and I saw it look at me. It looked me deep in the eye, and I saw her. Her. My sweet girl. My Nellie. Or more rather, what was pretending to be Nellie. It dropped Paul to the ground and terrifyingly reared its head into the air and howled deeply. It sounded like a mix between the sound of absolute pain and what I could only describe as Lupin's howl from Prisoner of Azkaban. That was the only motivation I needed to run. I hauled ass into my bedroom and dived into my closet and shut the door. I covered myself in dirty washing and stayed still. It felt like I laid there for a few million years. It walked, or skulked more rather, into my room. I heard its claws clatter across the hardwood floor before stopping. I couldn't see a fucking thing, but I heard it howl once again before it sounded like it tore my bed to fucking bits. I heard glass smash and hard objects collide with the walls. Then nothing. Complete silence once again before I skulk off and leave the house. Probably to finish eating my friend. It's now 7 a.m. I can hear sirens outside, but I'm too afraid to leave lest that thing is waiting for me on the other side of the door. The inky thing I could do for the last few hours was type this out and do research. But it didn't make sense. I Googled everything I remembered about that thing. I got a result that I'm fairly certain is what it is. It didn't make fucking sense. I read pages upon pages of this fucking thing, looked at artwork, folklore, everything. It doesn't make sense. The research says the location of the creature is found in the United States, usually on Native American land. So what is a goddamn Wendigo doing in rural New Zealand? Thanks a lot for watching the video. Till the end, subscribe to Horror in Detail for more videos. Drop your suggestions in comment section.